There is a silent, almost imperceptible instant when something within us breaks, like the discreet creak of ancient wood under the weight of time itself. It is the moment when our gaze turns inward and realizes, with astonishment and slight fear, that perhaps the entire architecture of the self was built on fragile foundations. This instant, which few dare to face, marks the beginning of an inner journey, and it is from this that the true impulse to know oneself is born. The world calls solitude what is in truth a return to center. The noise from outside ceases, and suddenly the silence becomes deafening. It is in this serene abyss that the spirit begins to move with a new gravity. Carl Jung said that what we deny within ourselves doesn't disappear. It merely hides in the shadows, waiting to be seen. And when human beings, tired of keeping their masks in place, begin to withdraw, it's not isolation that attracts them, but the call of these shadows demanding recognition. Discomfort with incessant coexistence, the feeling of weariness in the face of constant contact, are not defects of the soul. They are signs, the symptom of a consciousness preparing to dive into its own depths. We live in a time that glorifies noise, to be seen, to be heard, to be constant. This is the modern creed. The absence of words is mistaken for weakness, silence for guilt, and withdrawal for illness. The individual is pushed out of themselves, as if the value of existence depended on the number of voices surrounding them. And so, exhausted, human beings begin to fear emptiness, forgetting that it is precisely in emptiness that the soul breathes. But there's a luminous paradox in this story. The more one seeks the exterior, the further one becomes from one's own center. Constant interaction becomes anesthesia. The need for companionship becomes an escape disguised as affection. The inner home, that sacred space where the soul rests, begins to be invaded by presences that don't belong there. Every visit, every superficial conversation, every social obligation becomes a small violation of the inner temple. And when the body returns home, bearing the weight of hours and forced smiles, it is there, between the silent walls, that true encounter takes place. Removing the masks becomes a ritual. The expressions worn by coexistence fade, the voice lowers, the heart resumes its forgotten rhythm. It is in that moment that one understands. Home is not a physical shelter, but a living representation of one's own unconscious. The bedroom is the territory of dreams, the kitchen the womb of the spirit, the living room the space for dialogue between inner voices. Each room echoes a part of the psyche. When someone crosses the threshold of this space, they are not just entering a house, they are entering the symbolic territory of the self. Therefore, discomfort in the presence of others is not simply shyness. It is the psychic body reacting to the invasion of a foreign energy. Jung saw this as a natural movement, the impulse to preserve the integrity of the self, this totality that tries to maintain itself amidst the dispersion of the world. And there's something almost sacred about this preservation. Those who choose silence, who refuse continuous exposure, aren't fleeing from life, but protecting what's most essential in it. You're caring for the spark that sustains your own consciousness. Every moment alone is a reconnection with this spark, an opportunity to cleanse it of the dust of social masks, worn-out roles, and the opinions that shape us without us realizing it. But what exactly do we fear when silence approaches? Is it the absence of others or the excessive presence of ourselves? There's something unsettling about looking within and realizing how much we don't know. Human beings fear what they can't control, and within us lies a territory that escapes all forms of control. There reside impulses, memories, and forces that don't ask permission to exist. The fear of solitude is, in essence, the fear of finding ourselves. Carl Jung described this journey as a confrontation with the shadow, the sum total of everything we reject, everything we refuse to admit, everything we push to the depths of our unconscious. But the encounter with the shadow is not a punishment. It is an initiation. It is the beginning of true self-knowledge, the kind that is acquired not through books or conversations, but through the silent confrontation with who we are when no one else is looking. And there's a detail few realize. The shadow isn't just the dark side of the soul. It also holds dormant potential, power that hasn't yet been recognized. What seems like weakness, when understood, becomes strength. What was once fear becomes clarity. But this process requires courage. The courage to remain within oneself when everything around us cries out for distraction. Imagine the inner world as an old house. For a long time you lived only in the main room, brightly lit, full of voices and visitors. The doors to the other rooms were locked. One day, driven by a discomfort you can't name, you decide to explore them. Upon opening the first door, you feel the dense, almost palpable air of a forgotten space. The windows are covered, the floor covered in dust, yet there is something there, an old scent, a memory that awakens. The sensation is contradictory, fear and curiosity mingled. You move forward, light a candle, and what you see is not a monster but a mirror. In it, your own face watches you with an expression you've never seen before. This is the first step toward awakening, the recognition that there are parts of yourself waiting to be rescued. Every repressed memory, every denied emotion, every forgotten desire, all form a silent chorus begging to be heard. And when we finally listen, something reorganizes within. Chaos takes form. Pain transforms into language. However, this process comes at a price. The loss of superficiality. Those who begin to see their inner selves can no longer live amidst the noise of the world in the same way. Banal conversations lose their flavor. Empty encounters become unbearable. An almost physical need for authenticity emerges. And this is where isolation ceases to be a refuge and becomes an altar. The human being who learns to be with themselves finds a kind of freedom that no crowd can offer. But what will happen when this being tries to return to ordinary life? Will he be able to maintain the same inner purity in the face of external demands? Will he be able to look at others without projecting onto them the newly recognized shadows? There is a silent danger in knowing oneself too much. The risk of realizing that almost everything around us is illusory. And perhaps that's why many stop their journey halfway. Self-knowledge isn't comfortable. It's a creative destruction. Everything that was solid dissolves, and what emerges in its place is still undefined. But for Jung, it is precisely in this uncertain terrain that individuation arises, the process by which the human being ceases to be one mask among others and becomes themselves in their entirety. Ultimately, understanding that home is a reflection of the soul and that discomfort with others is the shadow's call changes everything. Isolation, once seen as a failure, reveals itself as a ritual. Silence, once feared, becomes a master, and the stranger knocking at the door, whether an unexpected visitor, a memory, or a dream, is no longer just the other. It is life itself asking for entry. The moment you understand this, your inner home begins to pulse differently. The walls breathe, the air seems denser, and loneliness, instead of a wound, becomes a window. You begin to sense that there is something, someone, waiting in the darkest room, beyond the doors that have not yet opened. And it is there, in this veiled space, that true encounter awaits. But before crossing that threshold, you need to decide, do you really want to see what's on the other side? There are days when the world weighs invisibly. There's no tragedy, no scream, just a weariness that doesn't come from the body but from something deeper, as if the soul has walked too far on foreign ground. It's at this point that we realize how much the presence of another can sometimes be a silent storm within us. The touch, the look, the words that cross the air carry intentions, memories, fragments of energy that infiltrate without asking permission. At first, it's easy to ignore. The rational mind finds justifications, but the body knows. It feels the weight of forced conversations, the exhaustion disguised as kindness, the subtle tightness in the chest after long hours of being together. Carl Jung said that the unconscious never lies. It just speaks in another language. And it's the unconscious that speaks when, suddenly, we feel the urge to withdraw. It's not antipathy, it's self-defense. It's the most ancient instinct trying to preserve the integrity of the being. Imagine yourself assembling a delicate puzzle, trying to understand the secret design of yourself. The pieces are scattered, some already fitting together, others still lost on the floor of the mind. Then someone enters, touches the table, moves everything. There's no malice in this gesture, but the result is the same. The pattern falls apart and the work must begin again. This is what happens when we allow the world to invade our inner space before it's ready to receive it. There's a woman who lives alone in a small apartment. She's not a recluse out of disgust, but out of necessity. The noise of the city, the social gatherings, the ever-urgent voices, everything distracts her. At night, she lights a single lamp, makes tea, and listens to the sound of the kettle as if listening to an oracle. There, in that simple ritual, she finds herself. The walls hold their silences, the plants grow slowly, and the air seems charged with an invisible presence, perhaps her own. When someone rings the doorbell unexpectedly, her heart races. She hesitates, not out of fear of the other, but because she knows that someone's presence there could break something subtle, the thread of a silent conversation she's having with her own spirit. Carl Jung saw home as a living symbol of the soul. In dreams, it appears frequently. Old houses, unfamiliar rooms, forgotten basements, attics full of memories. When we dream of a house, we are dreaming about ourselves. The upper floor represents the intellect, ideas. The ground floor, everyday life. The basement, the unconscious, that which we avoid seeing. And what happens when, in waking life, someone crosses this symbolic space? When someone enters without warning, opens doors, moves objects, they awaken dormant parts. Perhaps that's why certain visitors disturb us so much. They trigger something we didn't want to touch. There was also the man who was always the center of attention. He spoke loudly, laughed easily, and charmed crowds. But at some point he began to feel an emptiness that no company could fill. One night, returning home from another meeting, he stood at his own door, unable to turn the key. Inside, silence awaited him like a mirror. When he finally entered, he realized that everything was imbued with a strange absence. The laughter that used to echo had become a distant echo. He sat down on the sofa and, without knowing why, began to cry. It wasn't sadness. It was recognition. He realized he had spent his entire life opening the doors of his soul to everyone but himself. It is in this moment that the true meaning of solitude is understood. It is not a punishment. It is a call. It is an invitation to return to the inner realm and mend the cracks. But this return is demanding. It forces us to face what we have always avoided: the fear of being invisible, the terror of silence, the discomfort of not having a role to play. And yet, it is in this arid terrain that authenticity flourishes. There's something profoundly transformative about accepting your own rhythm. Some are made for the crowd, others for diving. Jung reminded us that individuation is a solitary process, because no one can do it for us. It takes time, patience, and above all, courage to inhabit one's own company. Each minute of silence becomes a mirror that returns a new image. At first, the reflection is strange, distorted, almost threatening. Then slowly, a clearer face emerges. Not the one we show the world, but the one that has always been hidden behind our gaze. The problem is that we've been trained to distrust silence. Culture teaches that happiness lies in expansion, in interaction, in sharing. Being alone feels like a failure, a sign of maladjustment. Thus, many flee from themselves, filling every space with noise, every moment with stimulation. But the soul, deprived of respite, begins to sicken. Small irritations, insomnia, a constant feeling of exhaustion. These are the messages it sends asking for respite. When ignored, they become crises. And it is then that life, with its uncomfortable wisdom, forces us to retreat. A dismissal, a separation, a loss. What seems like a disaster is, in fact, the necessary push for reunion. In these moments, the home becomes a mirror again. Notice, there are days when the space feels heavier, as if the walls absorb the tension. Other times, the air becomes light, transparent. This happens because physical space responds to emotional ones. External clutter betrays internal chaos. Cleaning, the attempt to restore balance. Some people, without realizing it, compulsively clean when something inside them wants to be reorganized. Others accumulate objects because they can't stand the emptiness, neither on the shelves nor in their hearts. One afternoon, the woman from the quiet apartment decided to open an old drawer. Inside, she found letters, photographs, and notes she hadn't read in years. Touching them, she felt dizzy. It was as if each piece of paper released a fragment of pent-up emotion. She cried, laughed, and remained motionless for long minutes. Finally, she burned everything. The ashes floated like small, liberated confessions. That night, she slept peacefully. For the first time in a long time, she dreamed of a staircase descending to a lighted basement. She woke with the feeling that something in her had been reconciled. Jung would explain, descent is the natural movement of the soul seeking integration. The unconscious is not an enemy. It is fertile territory awaiting cultivation. When we allow ourselves to descend, we encounter not monsters but aspects of ourselves that simply beg for light. The woman, upon opening that drawer, unknowingly initiated an archetypal ritual, that of confronting the shadow. The man in the crowd, crying alone on the couch, did the same. Each, in their own way, heard the soul's call to return to its center. But this return presents a disturbing paradox. The more we know ourselves, the more we realize how much others reflect our hidden parts. That friend who irritates us, the colleague who arouses envy, the stranger who causes discomfort, all are mirrors of unrecognized aspects. The shadow projects itself incessantly into the world, and when we begin to see it, the world changes color. People cease to be just people. They become symbols, messengers, fragments of our own unconscious manifesting before us. That's why certain visits disturb us so much. They bring not just words, but vibrations that resonate with something deep within. Perhaps the energy that bothers us in the other is the echo of a part of us asking for recognition. Thus, discomfort is not a sign of rejection, but of revelation. The other becomes a living mirror, and each encounter an invitation to lucidity. Ultimately, understanding this completely changes the way we are in the world. It's no longer about avoiding people, but about relating consciously. Inner silence ceases to be an escape and becomes a source. Solitude ceases to be absence and becomes fulfillment. The soul, once recognized, learns to open and close its doors wisely. It receives what nourishes, rejects what disturbs, and embraces what teaches. And then something new begins to emerge. It's a serenity independent of circumstances, a presence that doesn't need to be seen to exist. The inner home, once fragile, becomes a temple. Visitors who once caused discomfort begin to be seen differently, not as invaders but as unwitting teachers testing our integrity. That same night, the woman in the apartment heard the doorbell again. This time he took a deep breath and opened the door. Outside there was no one, just the empty hallway and the distant sound of rain. He smiled. He understood that the visit he had always feared had come from within, and that the true guest, the one who had finally arrived, was herself. But the moment she closed the door, she felt something different, a slight movement in the air, as if the space itself were breathing with her. Deep within the house, a door she had never opened seemed to tremble. Intuition whispered that there was still something to discover, a hidden room, a forgotten space, where perhaps the key to everything lay, and it is toward this invisible place, still closed to consciousness, that the soul will begin to journey. What it finds there, shadow or light, memory or revelation, will be the mystery that awaits the next crossing. There's a silent guilt that inhabits many hearts, the guilt of wanting to be alone. It appears disguised like a docile shadow, but its weight is ancestral. From an early age, we learn that love is measured by presence, that kindness is proven by availability, that isolation is a sign of weakness. Thus, when the body demands silence, the mind quickly responds with fear. There's something wrong with me. However, what reveals itself in this impulse to withdraw from the world is not a failure, but memory, a deep reminder of the soul that encountering the true self requires the absence of noise. Carl Jung understood this with rare clarity. Modern human beings are sickened by constant exposure because they have forgotten the initiatory value of solitude. We live in a time where being connected has become synonymous with existing. Messages arrive incessantly, voices call us from all sides, and even rest is invaded by notifications. Silence has become a luxury, and stillness, a heresy. Those who seek isolation are judged as arrogant or sad, when in fact, they are responding to an inner calling that society no longer knows how to hear. There is an ancient archetype, a figure that spans myths and eras, the hermit. He does not escape the world, but observes it from the outside to understand it from within. The hermit represents one who recognizes that wisdom is born of seclusion, that self-knowledge flourishes only where the noise of opinion ceases. But what if this urge to be alone isn't a flaw, but rather a form of sanity? Who said the ideal human being is one who never closes the door, who is always available, who transforms their own soul into a public square? Perhaps isolation isn't the opposite of life, but its secret heart. Perhaps the answers we so desperately seek in others are just waiting for the moment we dare to sit with ourselves in silence. There's a woman who works in a noisy office, surrounded by people who talk all day. She smiles, participates, but feels drained. Every day when she gets home, she lies on the bedroom floor and turns off the lights. She doesn't want music, conversation, or company, just the sound of her own breathing. For a few minutes, she feels as if time suspends her body and her soul finally returns. The world would call it exhaustion, but she senses something more. She feels that moment of absence is, in fact, the only instant in which she fully exists. Have you ever felt this? Have you ever realized that sometimes silence heals more than any words? That solitude, when accepted, has the power to reunite the pieces of us that coexistence scatters? Why then do we fear this emptiness so much? Jung asserted that the soul speaks through symbols, and the symbol of solitude, deep within the psyche, is the sacred space where the unconscious manifests itself undisguised. To be alone is to open a gap between the visible and the invisible, allowing ancient forces to awaken and reveal what has always been hidden. The hermit of ancient myths did not seek isolation out of selfishness, but out of spiritual necessity. He knew that, far from the gaze of the world, truth approaches, not as a grand revelation, but as a whisper that only silence allows us to hear. There's a scene that recurs in many dreams. Someone walks through a forest and upon reaching a clearing, finds a small wooden cabin. Inside, there's only a lit candle and a mirror. This recurring and mysterious image represents the moment when the unconscious calls the individual to confront their own reflection. It is there, in this minimal space, that the social self dies and the essential self awakens. The mirror doesn't show the everyday face but the gaze of the soul, the one that never allows itself to be photographed. But are we prepared for this encounter? Can we bear to see what lies behind the image we've constructed to please the world? Loneliness, when profound, begins to strip us bare. Justifications dissolve, masks fall away, roles become useless. It is in this state that true inner dialogue begins, and what we discover in it is not always gentle. Memories of unfulfilled promises emerge, of words we said without meaning, of loves we betrayed out of fear of being free. Each memory is a candle lit in the darkness, revealing fragments of ourselves we forgot to love. One night, the man of the crowds, the one who wept alone in the previous part, decides to walk aimlessly through the sleeping city. The streets are empty, the shop windows are dark, the wind blows like an ancient breath. He feels something driving him, a silent force that doesn't come from the mind. Without realizing it, he reaches the edge of a lake. The surface of the water reflects the dark sky and his own figure. There, kneeling, he sees not only his own face, but the countless faces he has worn in his life. The father, the friend, the lover, the professional, the son, they all blend together. And then for the first time, he understands that behind them all there is only one presence, that of the observer. What has always been there, untouched, watching. How many roles do we need to abandon until only the essential remains? Is silence the path to rediscovering the observer hidden behind our voices? Carl Jung called this moment individuation, the process of becoming who one is without fear of the isolation it demands. For him, the hermit is not an escape from life, but a seed of it. Seclusion is the womb where consciousness matures. And when the individual returns to the world after this immersion, they bring with them a new perspective, a presence that radiates calm even amidst chaos. True wisdom, Jung said, is not shouting louder, but listening to the silence until understanding what it is trying to say. The woman in the silent apartment, after the episode of the door and the rain, began to notice small changes. The air in her home seemed to vibrate differently. She dreamed of hallways that stretched beyond the familiar walls, of doors that opened by themselves to reveal windows overlooking nothingness. She woke with her heart racing, as if something were calling her. One day, she felt the urge to follow this call and began walking through the rooms with the feeling that someone was watching her, not an external presence, but an internal echo, a consciousness that had been waiting for her for a long time. Have you ever had the impression that something inside you observes everything, silently, patiently, as if waiting for the moment to be recognized? It was at that moment that she stopped before that ancient door, the same one that had trembled before. He touched the handle carefully. The metal was cold, almost alive. An inexplicable fear coursed through him. What would happen if she opened it? Maybe nothing, maybe everything. He took a deep breath and turned the key. The click echoed through the house like thunder in a closed chamber. On the other side, the darkness seemed to breathe. The mystery of self-knowledge begins there, on the threshold between the known and the unknown, between the illuminated room and the bedroom where time is forgotten to pass. Jung said that for something new to be born, the old must die, and this death is rarely comfortable. The fear we feel before our own inner doors is the same fear we feel before change. The woman took a step, and the floor creaked. The dim light revealed fragments of old objects, perhaps memories. In the air, a familiar scent, the smell of childhood, of first fear, of first dreams. In the center of the room, something gleamed, a veiled mirror. She approached hesitantly and removed the cloth. The reflected image wasn't just hers. It was a mosaic of faces, ages, expressions. The woman she had been, the child she had forgotten, the old woman she would still be. In this multifaceted reflection, she saw the whole for the first time. She wept, not out of sadness, but out of recognition. What if self-knowledge is not a path to reaching a new self, but to remembering all the selves we have been and still are? The mirror seemed to pulse with a life of its own. For an instant, the woman felt something inside her expand, touching the invisible. It wasn't fear, it was surrender. She understood that that room, dark, hidden, forgotten, was the symbol of her soul in its raw state. Everything she had avoided, everything she had denied was there, begging for light. And for the first time, she didn't back down. As I left the room, the walls of the house seemed brighter. The light came in differently. The silence was no longer a burden but music, yet I knew this was only the beginning. Passing through the first door is always the beginning of the true path. And now one question remains. What happens when, after seeing our own reflection, we discover that there are no longer enough mirrors to contain who we are? There's a time of day when silence seems to thicken. It's not just an absence of sound, but an invisible, almost palpable substance that fills the air and alters time. It's at that moment that we realize an uncomfortable truth. When we're alone, we are more ourselves than at any other time. There's something revelatory about this retreat, a sincerity beyond words, a lucidity that manifests itself when the world finally falls silent. Carl Jung said that the soul is nourished by images and silence, and perhaps that's why isolation, far from being emptiness, becomes plenitude. People who drain our energy, who demand our constant presence, who make coexistence an obligation, are not evil. They simply dance to a different rhythm. Their instruments are tuned differently. While some need noise to feel alive, others only breathe peacefully when the world's sound fades. The error lies in thinking there is a universal model of existence, when in fact there are infinite ways of pulsating. Society, obsessed with movement and exposure, has forgotten that there is also beauty in stillness, that silence is a kind of language. But what happens when we decide to listen to this language and step away from the din? Will the world forgive us for this? Or will we begin to disappear in the eyes of those who only see the noise? A middle-aged man once left everything to live in a cabin in the mountains. For years, he was considered crazy. Neighbors whispered that he had escaped reality. But when someone finally visited him, they found a small notebook on the table, filled with notes about the wind, the phases of the moon, and the water cycles. He observed the world not to control it, but to understand it. Each page was a silent conversation between himself and nature. When asked about loneliness, he simply replied, "Solitude is when the soul is alone. Here, I am in company." This response resonates with a profound lesson, because true isolation is not the absence of contact, but the full presence of oneself. Jung saw this type of experience as an archetypal return to the figure of the hermit, one who withdraws not out of disgust, but out of love for inner truth. The hermit does not reject the world. He contemplates it from the outside to see it clearly. Just as the eye cannot see its own body without a mirror, consciousness needs distance to understand itself. What if the discomfort we feel in the face of crowds isn't aversion, but homesickness? What if, by rejecting certain company, we're simply trying to protect what remains sacred within us? There are curious accounts of people who, after long periods of silence, began to perceive subtle sounds, the creaking of wood, the distant murmur of water, even their own heartbeat. Over time, these sounds transformed into symbolic language. A Tibetan monk reported that, after years of isolation, he heard his own breath pronounce the name of something he could not translate, but knew to mean origin. Jung would believe that this type of phenomenon is the unconscious communicating in its purest form. When the mind is still, the spirit speaks. However, there is a paradox. The closer we approach silence, the more we realize that the noise of the world dwells within us. Even in solitude, we carry the voices that shaped us: expectations, guilt, demands. The mind, accustomed to the noise, tries to fill the void with memories. Only after facing this whirlwind does true stillness set in. Solitude, therefore, is not an immediate refuge. It is an inner battleground. Have you ever tried to remain in absolute silence for an hour? It's not about shutting your mouth, but about suspending all stimulation. No music, no screen, no reading, no talking. The first minute is peaceful. The second brings boredom. Then images, thoughts, old memories begin to surface. And if you persist, the silence begins to reveal what truly lives within you. That's why few can endure stillness. It's not sweet at first. It's too revealing. A woman once reported that after a week without human contact, she began dreaming of unfamiliar faces speaking to her in languages she didn't understand. When she wrote down the words upon waking, she realized they formed sentences with symbolic meanings, messages about forgiveness, time, and acceptance. Reading Jung, she found an explanation. The psyche, when deprived of external noise, begins to dialogue with the collective unconscious, that vast ocean of images and archetypes that inhabit all of humanity. What seemed like madness was, in fact, the soul remembering that it is made of the same fabric as the world. But what would happen if we all saw again? If all of humanity learned to listen to this ancient voice that only speaks in silence? Perhaps we would rediscover something that progress has made a point of forgetting: the simplicity of being. The woman in the silent apartment began to experience this. After opening the door to the hidden room, she spent days in a state of strange serenity. Time seemed to slow down. Some mornings, the sun streamed through the window with a new, almost liquid luminosity. She began to notice coincidences: a song playing at the exact moment she was thinking of something, an object falling by itself, a candle extinguishing itself without wind. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but there was a pattern. It was as if the entire house had become an extension of her unconscious, responding to her every emotion. Carl Jung described similar phenomena under the name synchronicity, external events that reflect internal states with symbolic precision. The woman, unknowingly, was experiencing this invisible dance between inside and outside. Every detail was a message. A crack in the wall revealed where the soul still ached. A flower that bloomed spontaneously in a dry vase revealed where desire had been reborn. The material world became a mirror of the psyche. And what's most surprising, the more she accepted silence, the more fulfilled she felt. Solitude, once feared, had become a source of energy. She no longer needed to run away from people because the fear of contact had dissolved. She could be in the middle of a crowd and still remain at its center. Have you ever felt whole in the midst of chaos? Have you ever experienced the strange sensation of being completely present, even when the world around you is falling apart? Some say this state is the beginning of true freedom. Not the freedom to come and go, but the freedom to be. The woman began to understand that isolation was not the destination, but the passage. Seclusion had taught her to stand on her own 2 feet. When you know yourself deeply, there is no longer any need to defend yourself. The other ceases to be a threat and becomes a mirror, a companion on the journey, a reflection of possibilities. But there was something else, something she didn't yet fully understand. One night, she awoke to a soft sound coming from the dark room. It wasn't noise. It was melody, a low note, like a distant whisper. She walked toward it, guided only by the faint moonlight. The air was thick, almost vibrant. In the center of the room, the veiled mirror had become translucent, revealing not a reflection, but a landscape: mountains, rivers, an orange sky, and on the horizon, a figure walked slowly toward her. It was neither man nor woman, but a luminous, familiar presence. In that instant, he understood that the mirror showed neither the past nor the future, but his own interior. The figure approaching was himself, not the one who lived in the world, but the one who observed the world behind his eyes. The encounter with the self, as Jung described it, is always preceded by amazement, the recognition that we are both the observer and the observed. The woman reached out toward the mirror, and the figure did the same. When their fingers nearly touched, the glass dissolved like water, and a warmth coursed through her entire body. There was no longer any distinction between inside and outside. Everything was a single space of consciousness. And then the sound ceased. The night remained still. Looking around, she realized the whole house was breathing with her. The air was alive. Loneliness at last had shown its deepest face. It wasn't an absence of company, but a communion with everything. And it's at this point that the story takes an invisible step. Because once you discover that silence is a presence, you can never go back to noise in the same way again. But what comes after this encounter? What happens when the soul, recognizing itself as whole, must return to the fragmented world? What form does the one who has passed through the mirror and brought with them the sound of the invisible take? Perhaps the answer is about to reveal itself, not as a theory, but as an event. Something begins to move silently behind the walls of consciousness. Something that prepares the next threshold. The air was thick that night. The woman woke with her heart racing, sensing something different in the room. The silence, previously serene, now seemed to vibrate, as if carrying a message. She sat on the edge of the bed, observing the room plunged into darkness. The house was alive. Every piece of furniture, every shadow, every breath seemed to have consciousness. It was as if, after the encounter in the mirror, something had irreversibly opened. The inner world had overflowed, and now the invisible moved between the walls. Carl Jung would write that at this point, the unconscious ceases to be merely hidden territory and begins to manifest itself in everyday life, seeking integration. The woman understood, albeit without words, that this was the beginning of the true journey. She went to the window and surveyed the deserted street. The city was asleep, but the air seemed to pulse with a subterranean energy. Something was calling her from within and without at the same time. It was a paradoxical sensation. Fear and fascination mingled. She returned to the center of the house, guided only by intuition. The floor creaked beneath her feet, as if reacting to her presence. When she reached the living room, she saw that the mirror, the one that had previously dissolved, now reflected the intact image of the house, but with an impossible detail. In the reflection, the lights were on, and a figure remained motionless, watching her. She felt a chill run down her spine. The figure was herself, but there was something different in that gaze. It wasn't the fear or curiosity of their previous encounter. It was a presence that knew more than she could comprehend. The woman approached slowly. The reflection watched her serenely, as if it had been expecting this reunion. When she stood face to face with the glass, she heard her own voice coming from the other side. "Now you must decide." The words rang out clearly, but the reflection's lips didn't move. "Decide what?" she thought, lacking the courage to speak. The reflection smiled, and then the scene began to distort. The image of the house dissolved, revealing behind it a landscape that seemed out of this world, an infinite field of light and shadow, where the sky blended with the ground in constant motion. The woman felt an irresistible force pulling her inward. She tried to resist, but the gravity of it was stronger than any will. In seconds, the mirror became a passage, and she stepped through. On the other side, time didn't exist. The sensation was of being simultaneously awake and dreaming. The ground was liquid and firm at the same time, and the air vibrated with hues. She realized that each emotion she felt shaped the environment. Fear made everything dark. Curiosity brought light. Love made the space expand. It was like walking inside her own mind. She understood that she was within her own unconscious, the territory where all versions of herself coexisted. Carl Jung called this place psychic wholeness. The self, the core of consciousness that contains all we were, are, and can be. There, the woman saw fragments of her life emerge and dissolve. The frightened child, the dreamy young woman, the adult who had learned to be silent. Each image was accompanied by a pure, undisguised emotion. Suffering was not pain, it was revelation. Joy was not euphoria, it was completeness. But not all was light. Shadows moved at the edges of this space, silent, dense shapes, watching her with faceless gazes. The woman realized she was facing what she had always feared, the denied parts, the old pains, the repressed feelings. The shadow, as Jung described it, is everything we fail to recognize within ourselves. Now these presences were slowly approaching. Her initial impulse was to flee, but something inside her whispered, "Stay." She took a deep breath and remained still. As the shadows approached, she realized they didn't actually want to attack her. Each one carried a fragment of memory, a forgotten word, an ancient gesture. One bore the gaze of someone she had hurt and never forgiven. Another, the face of fear that had made her hide from love. Each shadow knelt before her and, upon touching her, dissolved into light. It was at that moment that she understood the reflection's message. The decision was to accept herself completely. No part could be rejected, no memory could remain locked away. Everything needed to return to the center. But just when she thought she had integrated everything, a final shadow appeared. Larger, silent, invisible. The presence was different. It carried no image, no sound, no form, only a sensation, that of nothingness. The woman felt her heart race. It was the primal fear, that of disappearing. This shadow didn't represent a trauma or a memory. It was the very limit of consciousness. Jung would call it the archetype of symbolic death, the moment when the ego must dissolve for the self to fully awaken. She closed her eyes. There was no choice. She took a step into the void. For an instant, everything faded. Her body, time, thought. It was like plunging into absolute silence, where even her own self ceased to exist. And in that silence, something happened. A soft light coming from within began to expand. It was a flame without heat, but alive, pulsating. When she opened her eyes, she realized that nothingness had transformed into space. Shadow had become clarity. Suddenly, she was back in the room. The mirror remained before her, but now it was just glass. No reflection, no image, just transparency. Her heart still racing, her body light. She walked to the window and watched the dawn. The sky was tinged with gold, and for the first time she felt that time flowed in harmony with her soul. The outer world and the inner world seemed the same. Jung said that the integration of the shadow is the birth of the authentic individual. The woman understood this now. Her resistance to visitors, her love of solitude, her fear of noise, all were language. The soul always knew the way. She just needed to listen. Have you ever noticed that when silence is complete, it's not empty but full of presence? That there's something inside us that observes everything calmly, even when life seems like a whirlwind? That morning, she did something simple. She opened the door and let the light in. The wind brought the scent of the trees and the distant sound of children playing. There was no longer any conflict between inside and outside. Solitude had taught her love, and love now allowed for encounter. But before leaving, he glanced again at the mirror and noticed something subtle, a nearly invisible inscription etched into the glass. He moved closer. The words seemed to have formed from the condensation of the air itself. He read slowly, "You are the home." He smiled. He understood that the journey wasn't about withdrawing from the world, but about inhabiting it completely. When a human being recognizes themselves as whole, every gesture becomes sacred. Every look, a prayer. Every silence, a bridge. Still, a question echoed within him, soft, insistent like a distant knock. What happens after one returns from oneself? And this question, like every good question, required no answer, only continuity. Because every awakened soul must one day return to the world, not to lose it again, but to illuminate it with the silence it has learned to hear. The mirror remained there, inert, reflecting the full emptiness of the morning. And in the center of the house, now in perfect stillness, a final voice seemed to echo, serene and deep, as if coming from the very foundation. The path does not end here. It has merely become visible. And so it was that between the light and the silence, she realized, with the clarity of one awakening, that her true home had never been outside. It had always been waiting for her, patiently, within her own heart. There is a moment, inevitable and silent, when everything aligns, body, mind, and what lies deep within us. It is when the noise of the world finally dissolves, and we stand before that which has always been waiting, the simple truth of our own presence. After so many doors opened and closed, after so many reflections traversed, only what is essential remains, the encounter with our own soul, free of masks, free of fears, free of the need to be someone for the gaze of others. It is in this moment that we understand that solitude was never absence, but the most direct path back to our inner home. Carl Jung called this individuation, and said that in it, the human being ceases to be a fragment and becomes wholeness. The woman, now at peace, lives in the same apartment. The walls are the same, but everything has changed. There is no longer any tension between inside and outside, nor any fear of others' presence. The doorbell rings sometimes, and she no longer feels the tightness in her chest. She simply consciously chooses when to open the door and when to remain silent. She has learned that saying no is a form of love, and that every true yes only comes when the heart is whole. The mirror is still there hanging on the wall, but it has become transparent. Now it reflects the world serenely, and sometimes when she passes by it, she feels a slight vibration, as if the glass breathes along with her. Carl Jung said that the soul is a living organism, and that everything we deny within it continues to act silently until it is acknowledged. This is why self-knowledge is not a luxury, it's a necessity. Until we learn to listen to what the unconscious is trying to tell us, we live repeating patterns, attracting the same situations, reliving the same pain with different faces. But when we finally stop and listen, something changes at the root. Life ceases to be a cycle of repetition and becomes a spiral of growth. Have you ever felt this difference? Have you ever noticed the moment when you stop reacting and begin to understand? It's as if time suddenly breathes along with you. The world remains the same, but the way you inhabit it changes completely. What was once a threat becomes a symbol. What was once fear becomes a master. True freedom lies not in doing everything, but in recognizing what truly matters. The soul needs space to breathe. It needs time, silence, and kindness. It is in this interval between one thought and the next that the unconscious reveals its wisdom. When you allow yourself to be silent, you begin to notice subtle signs, coincidences, intuitions, dreams that seem like answers. These experiences are not supernatural, they are deeply human. Jung would call this synchronicity, the language of the world speaking directly to your inner self. But how can we apply all this to our daily lives? How can we transform symbolic learning into living practice? The answer is simple, yet profound. Start with the space that surrounds you. The home, as Jung observed, is the visible expression of the soul. Tidying up the home is, symbolically, organizing the unconscious. Each object held and clinging represents an unresolved memory. Each dusty corner is a thought we avoid facing. When you clean, when you open windows, when you rearrange the space, you're not just moving things. You're moving psychic energy. Try transforming the act of housekeeping into a silent ritual. Do it slowly, with presence. Notice how the air changes, how your mind calms, how your body gives thanks. Then look at your relationships. Not everyone around you needs to stay. Not every presence is healthy. There are people who bring light, and others who extinguish the inner fire. It's not selfish to walk away from what consumes you. It's respect for your own spark. Choosing silence sometimes is choosing life. Saying no is protecting the temple you've built within yourself. And above all, learn to be with yourself. Turn off the noise. Sit in silence unhurriedly. Breathe deeply. Observe the sound of your own body existing. This is the turning point. The moment when you stop searching outside for what has always been inside. At first, it may feel uncomfortable, as if the void were too great. But little by little, you will realize that silence is not emptiness. It is plenitude in its purest form. Carl Jung said that the light we seek is not above, but in the depths. It is in diving within that we find the flame that no gale can extinguish. The hermit in the ancient stories carries a lantern, and this light is not borrowed. It is the flame of understanding itself, lit in the heart. This same light exists within you. Each time you close your eyes and listen to what the silence says, it grows stronger. Each time you choose truth over appearances, it shines a little brighter. You don't need to isolate yourself from the world. Just learn to turn to yourself without fear. Balance arises when the inside and the outside learn to converse. When you know yourself deeply, the other ceases to be a threat and becomes an extension of the same mystery. Solitude then becomes a source, and encounters with others cease to be a necessity and become a celebration. Now imagine what would happen if more people discovered this, if everyone learned to protect their inner space, to listen to the silence before responding, to recognize the sacred in the pause. Perhaps the world would become a little calmer, more sensible, more human. Perhaps the peace we so desperately seek outside would finally begin within. So, allow yourself a simple gesture. Close the door, take a deep breath, and listen to what the silence has to say. Perhaps it will show you what you've always known but forgotten because of the noise. True home isn't where you live, but the space where your soul can rest. And now that you've come this far, that you've walked this journey of self-discovery with me, I invite you to take the next step, not just to understand, but to live. Set aside a moment of your day to be alone. Turn off your phone, dim the lights, and just listen. Perhaps nothing will happen, and yet everything will change. Because silence, when embraced with love, becomes revelation. If this journey touched something within you, if at some point in this narrative you found your own reflection, share it with me. Write a comment, even if it's anonymous. A word, a feeling, a thought. Every voice that manifests itself in the silence helps others awaken as well. And if you want to continue this journey of self-discovery and symbolism with me, subscribe to the channel. There is still much to be explored in the invisible territory of being. Like, comment, subscribe, but first and foremost, breathe. Because what you're looking for isn't out there, it's right there where the silence begins to hear you back.